Hey, this is Adam from realworldworship.org, and today I want to talk about why I think fractal effects aren't a bigger thing in praise and worship guitar culture. I've talked about this before, but about a year ago I made a switch from a traditional pedal board and amp setup to digital equipment. Started with the Kemper, then I went to the Helix. Nothing against the Kemper, in fact I'd like to get one again and use it in conjunction with the Helix, but I haven't seriously considered Fractal, and I'm not alone. You don't see, if you follow the Instagram of well-known worship leaders, worship ministries, what's posted on different social medias, you don't see Fractal the way you see Kemper, the way you see Helix. Why is that? Let's be honest and say that part of that is trends. Fractal Axe Effects is not trendy in church circles right now. That's not a knock against anybody. That's just how life works. If you hang out with country players, there's going to be gear that's trendy among country players, gear that's trendy among jazz players, gear that's trendy among metal players. For whatever reason, the guys who are tastemakers aren't using Fractal. Now, that aside, because it's a reason, but it's not the only reason, I think the biggest reason why Fractal audio equipment is not more widely used is the cost. And it's definitely been the biggest reason for me. The Axe Effects 3, their flagship unit, is $2,500 new. The flagship unit for the Kemper profiling amp, non-powered, is $1,800 new. The Line 6 Helix floor, the flagship model, is $1,600 new. That's almost $1,000 less than the flagship model for Fractal. And it's $700 less for the flagship model for Kemper. So cost is a big deal. Plus, if you get the Fractal Audio Axe Effects 3, you, for live use, probably need the remote. The remote's an extra $700. The remote for a Kemper new is $450. The cost is a massive difference. Now, I will say, every demo or YouTube video or anything that I have heard with an Axe Effect sounds fantastic. It sounds to me like they really have gotten all of the effects right, which is what the Helix does best, and the amps right, which is what the Kemper does best, and they've put them all together. Sounds fantastic. And, I mean, if you are seriously thinking about using the Helix and the Kemper together, you probably should, and I'm speaking to myself, consider the Fractal, just because overall it would be more affordable. That being said, it's not just cost. Fractal is inherently behind the curve, and here's what I mean for that. If you use a Kemper profiling amp, and whether you're using the remote or you're using it with your traditional pedal board, you are using their flagship product. If you use the Helix floor unit, you are using their flagship product. Of course, there are cheaper options down the line. The Helix LT, the Helix Stomp. There's absolutely cheaper options down the line, but their flagship product is affordable. If you're using the FX8 or the AX8, which are Fractal's all-in-one kind of pedal boards, that's not their flagship model. In fact, they're not even based off their flagship model. They are stripped-down versions, and everything I've read says they're like 80% of the Axe Effects 2. So that means that eventually they're going to come out with like an AX8 2 or an AX8 HD, whatever they brand it. It'll be a stripped-down version of the Axe Effects 3. But when's that going to happen? They just came out with the 3, so we're not talking about tomorrow or next week, 6 months at the earliest, but you're always going to be behind the curve. And that affects things. That's definitely a thing where I go, okay, should I consider switching from the Helix or the Kemper to like an AX8? Well, it's not even based off the most current technology that they have. Whereas if you think about, should I switch from whatever I'm using, and maybe I don't want to go to the Helix, but I will go to the LT or the Stomp, but it's based off of their current flagship technology. So the way that Fractal is rolling out products and is currently set up, they are inherently behind the curve, whereas Kemper and Helix, you're riding ahead of it. Also, if you do get their flagship unit, you get the Fractal, the AXFX 3, you have to get a rack unit. It's a rack-mounted unit. Somebody might say that's not a big deal. I've never used rack units, so I get it. Then I have to pay the extra money to get a rack case for it on top of the remote. So now the price new for AXFX 3 has jumped up to $3,400, $3,300, something like that. But I've never used rack gear before. Yeah, there's a rack-mounted version of the Kemper. Yes, there's a rack-mounted version of the Helix. But those are options. Those are both of those companies saying there is a certain part of the consumer base that wants those things. But if you get a Kemper to replace your amp, you're just buying a different amp. The difference between a Kemper and a traditional tube amp is the technology used, but the difference between a traditional tube amp and a traditional solid state amp is just the technology used, but you're just buying an amp. The Kemper's an amplifier that has effects. The Helix is like an effects platform that happens to have amp sims. So if you buy a Helix to replace your pedal board, you're really just using different technology to accomplish the same thing. But it's the same format, a pedal board or an amplifier. A rack unit's a totally different thing. So for all of these reasons, I think there's also feature set. The AXFX 3 is apparently starting to deal with some of that stuff, like being able to have dual amps and all of these things. But the basic idea is, I think, from what I can tell, the Fractal stuff is probably overall like the best. But there are a lot of things that make it hard for people to adopt. And you can kind of see who's adopting the Fractal stuff. Metal players, studio guys, but that's it. And people that are looking to get in at a certain price point, or people that need certain feature sets, they're not finding a home there yet. I'm very interested to see what they do in the future. I'm not saying I'd never buy it. This video is really intended for somebody who is doing what a lot of us do, looking at YouTube videos trying to determine what they're going to buy. That's what this is for. So this is my reasoning why I don't think Fractal is an option for a lot of people. But if you find that it's an option for you, awesome. I think for a lot of us, there's reasons that I've listed and others where we've decided it's not going to work for us right now. So hopefully in the future, it becomes more accessible. If there is a Fractal, kind of like the Kemper toaster, as an amp option, I would consider it. And if they made a current version floorboard, the way that Helix does, I'd consider it. But we'll see. All right. If you disagree with me, or if you've had a different opinion or experience, feel free to leave a comment below. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.